Hello, and it's a victory day. I'm Larry Parrish, Executive Director for S.H.I.N.E CDC, and we put together for you a wonderful panel. I have to just thank our wonderful founder and CEO of S.H.I.N.E CDC, Dr. Jazz, and my pastor for coming up with this wonderful idea of how can we bridge the gap between the community and law enforcement. So we put together a panel today, and I'm going to start to go ahead and introduce the panel. I want to first start with Chief Harris. Chief, could you introduce yourself to the Facebook Live team, please?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you, sir. And then I also want to introduce Officer Rivers. Officer Rivers, I think we're talking on mute. Okay. And then we have a
Say that
retired
again. I didn't
police
hear you.
officer. No, we were just telling you to introduce yourself.
Okay.
Okay. And then we have a retired police officer, Miss Angie Lewis. Angie, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you for the invite. I am a retired police officer from the Metropolitan Police Department, and my name is Angela Lewis, and I thank you and Dr. Jazz for the opportunity to share.
Absolutely. Well, I'm just going to jump right in and we're going to have this panel discussion. And I'm going to start off with my personal experience of what happened to me. So I reported my car stolen, but it wasn't stolen and we recovered it. I thought they had took it out the system. I called, but they didn't. I get pulled over like a week later and I'm waiting for the officer to come out of his car and I'm still waiting. And about 15 minutes had gone. And then I see about 6 police cars drive up and they jump out the car. They got their guns drawn and they say, "Get out the car with your hands up." I complied with everything that they said, but I have to say the way that I felt like I was going to get shot because I was like so nervous. I was like, I don't want to move my cell phone. I don't want to do anything. So I laid my cell phone on the passenger seat and I got out of the car. They said, "Now put your hands up and walk backwards." Still guns on me. "Put your hands up and walk backwards." And then they said, "We're going to handcuff you." And they put me on the ground. I can't even tell you how afraid I was. And I kept saying, how am I being, how am I being arrested in my own car? So then I said, my license and my registration is actually on the seat. And they said, "Well, if that's true, then we'll let you go once we check it." And of course they checked it, but the way they treated me, because I even asked the officer after it was all over, I said, "Well, first of all, why did you pull me over? Because I wasn't speeding." And he said, "Well, we ran your tags." Well, I said, "Well, why did you run my tags?" He said, "We do that periodically to run the tags." And it came up, car stolen. I said, "But I called a week ago and said that my car wasn't stolen." And they said they had took it out the system. And I just have to say to all of you, the way that made me feel, I couldn't even go to work that day. I felt like my life was getting ready to end. And I'm just going to be honest with you. I was so afraid. I didn't know what to do. What could I have said? Because I felt like I was lost and I was fighting a losing battle because I'm like, I'm in my own car. I wasn't speeding, and you telling me you ran my tags. I was in a Lexus truck, and I'm saying, this is my car. So I want to start with you, Chief Ferris. What did I do wrong, or what could I have done differently? Because the way that made me feel, I felt really, really bad for a long time.
That's a great question, and I think all throughout the country we are seeing these same similar types of incidents where um, people have engaged with officers, whether right or wrong, but the experience has left a negative impact on different residents. So I don't think there's anything that you can say that you did wrong. I think that there was a problem with a particular process that was in place. But the important part is that when you as a resident or a citizen express a concern, that there is a level of empathy that we have in law enforcement to understand that particular situation. You know, we may see a ton of different things throughout our career, and it allows us to end up becoming numb to something. So an experience for us may not be the same experience for you. But in order for this to work, we have to acknowledge your experience in any way, shape, or form, and then figure out how can we prevent that from happening to anyone else. And so it sounds like that particular situation, there were questions that were never answered. So it left an experience for you, but your questions as a resident were never answered. And that's the first thing we got to do. We got to say, all right, there was a mistake. Clearly, there was a mistake there, right? Because there was no car stolen. How do we not? What happened in this process, and how do we prevent it in the future? And how do we make sure that you as the resident are now at ease to know that this won't happen again because of the situation? And I think that's the important part.
Okay. Angie, what would you add to that? Can you hear us, Angie?
Yes, but
Okay. What would you add to that?
can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Like the chief said, it's always, our responsibility to be accountable for the respect of the citizens and the residents and who we stop. But as you stated, the officers made a stop based on the fact that they had information that your vehicle was stolen. And like the chief said, a lot of times the process is information doesn't meet up with the time. And so what happened is they were trying to do, our responsibility is protection of life and property. And like you said, you had already put in a report that your car was stolen. It's just that the information did not process in time, which the police department should have entered your information back in the system that it was recovered. And because that didn't catch up with time, then now when the officers stop you, they're concerned with their safety. And when they ran your tag, they did everything that they were supposed to do by stopping you and telling you to get out of the car and asking you to hold your hands up and making sure that the scene was safe, both for you and for them. And we always want to react to any type of threat to desensitize or deactivate or make sure that threat in numbers. The officer provided himself. He may have been patrolling by himself, found out that, hey, I'm running up on a car that's stolen. I need to call for more support. You're always better in numbers. And so once they get you to a point where now they have you under control and they can ask you what I always say in any training that we've done in law enforcement is the 5 W's and the H. It's the same thing when you write a paper. You need to find out the who, what, when, why, and where. And then, once you can find that information out, then you can not dehumanize, you can put respect on the situation by saying, you know what, sir, we stopped you for the fact that your car was stolen. Let us investigate this. They have the scene under control so that you're safe and the officer is safe. And once the information is found out, then they're able to respond to your questions. But anytime that you feel that law enforcement has not done their job and we, embarrassed you or anything like that, then there's always another process. And that means that you can go into the station and file a complaint. But we always want to do what's right by law enforcement in regards to your feelings, to how you're handled correctly or incorrectly.
Okay. Now, I want to bring you in, Officer Rivers, because I want to talk about this because everybody knows what happened in Atlanta. And the reason why I want to bring you in, I want to talk to you about this is because what if I had reacted in a different way? Because I'm in my own car. I did everything that I was supposed to do. I reported it stolen. And then once it was found, you all told me you took it out the system. So you pulling me over and I know I didn't do anything wrong and they're telling me to get out the car. What if I have reacted in a different way? I may not be here today because I might even say, I'm not getting out the car. This is my car. But I'm like, I'm going to do everything that they tell me to do because I've got what, 2 on each side. I got 4 guns drawn on me. It was 2 on the passenger side and 2 on the driver's side. So I'm like, okay, I'm freaking out. I don't know what to do. But I'm just saying, I could have done something differently that could have led to a whole different situation. So Rivers, come in, talk to me. What do you think about that? Because I really could have handled this in a different way if I wasn't thinking practical. Rivers, can you hear us? No, we may. Okay, we're going to come back to Rivers. We may be having some problem with those. Chief Harris, what if I had acted in a different way?
The unfortunate
I
part
mean,
is
I could.
oh, there's Officer Rivers.
Okay. Go ahead, Rivers. We can hear you. Rivers, we can hear you. Go ahead. Take yourself off mute.
Okay, yeah, I caught some of that because it's kind of broken. But you were saying
Okay.
like if you would have, you were saying if you would have acted a different way than what you
Yeah,
did.
if I responded in a different way because I'm in my own car, and I could have said, no, I'm not getting out. This is my car. And I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. I knew I wasn't speeding. I don't drink, so I know I know I didn't do anything wrong. I'm staying in my car. I think we're having some. We're going to come back to River. Go ahead and take it
Okay,
away,
yeah.
Chief.
Well, I guess a couple of things.
Rivers, we're having some issues with your
Can you hear me
audio.
now?
So refresh. No, we couldn't hear you. Refresh and then just come on back in. Let's go to you, Office. Let's go to you, Chief Harris.
I think the first thing,
Okay.
if you said that if you had chosen to go a different route with that stop, you know, I think one of the things that we learned, the first thing we learned in schooling was comply and appeal. You always have another process to go through, but I would never encourage somebody to to disrespect or to stop a process, even when you know that you are in the right. And that one thing I learned about policing, even when I was in patrol and when I went to, and then even as a becoming administrator, adults don't like correction. Simply, you can be right, we can be in the right, and you could actually have done something wrong. Adults just don't like correction, and we have to understand that. But the reality of it is that even if that officer is disrespectful, if that officer violates the policy, that officer has a supervisor. Me as a chief, people may look at me and say that, oh, I'm a chief and I'm the top authority of the police department, but I report to a mayor and a council who is very active in our community. So there's always a process that we have to go through. The problem is that our community does not know these processes. They don't understand what these processes are, how to file a complaint. They don't understand these processes to get involved and to make sure that these things don't happen again. I would never encourage somebody not to do what an officer says, especially if you said the situation where guns were drawn, a situation like that.
Yeah.
So clearly there was some misinformation that they had. So I would never encourage somebody to do that because we don't want it to go into a totally different category. We don't want it to turn badly. We don't want anyone hurt. I don't know one officer in my time in the entire DMV who comes to work with the intentions of using force. We want to go home just like everybody else. So it's and be honest with you, we don't want to have to do all that extra paperwork, especially to come to find out that something's a mistake. So we want to be able, so I would never encourage somebody to do that. But at the same time, I do believe that there is a level of understanding that we have to have. There's a scripture that says, "My people are destroyed for their lack of knowledge." We, as a citizen, have to get involved and understand what's going on in these police departments. But these police departments have to understand the reality of what our community is facing, and that is the only way the gaps get bridged.
Get home safe. I'm hearing people say, get home safe. Hey, Angie, I want to come over to you for a second. With all the unrest that we're seeing all across, I mean, we can't even say the United States of America anymore. We can just say the world now. What advice would you give me or the young folks out there as we're dealing with everything that's being played out in society and the Black Lives Movement and everything that's just really happening right now? And people are saying defund the police and all these things are out there. What would you say to just the average citizen like me or some of the young folks that will come on a little bit later?
Well, first of all, we always have to continue to pray for one another. And we know that we have to trust that God will avenge for the things that are done unjustly. And we have to rely on the justice system. But, the most important thing is we have to love one another, love our neighbor, and really just find a space in our heart to reconcile. And I mean, we have to vote, we have to advocate, we have to work together. They always say a family that prays together stays together. Well, as a community, the officers live in the community as well. We're humans as well. And so what we have to do is we have to continue to reform, ask for, advocate for uh, the police officers for training and retraining, restructure the way that we police. The police department is always willing to learn and accept the responsibility that we have to change. I mean, we all have to change. As time continues to grow in life, we all change. So, community policing has been one of our tools for getting trust back within the community. And in order for us to survive or thrive as a nation, we're going to have to learn how to trust each other. And rebuilding trust takes time. Our pastor always talks about fear. Is something that we have to remove. It's false evidence appearing real. But we see the things that are going on in the world today. These things that we see that are not a form of evidence appearing real, they're facts. We saw the fact that the officer put his knee on George Floyd's neck, and that will put anybody in fear. As law enforcement officers, I mean, I drive around too, and I'm just as afraid as you are when I get stopped by the police. So it's not to remove anybody from being disrespected. We have to, make sure that officers are accountable. But I think that overall, we have to band together and just ask for officers retraining, diversity. The police officers that we're hiring today need to have cultural awareness. We've had programs instituted in law enforcement for most people that don't know that. It's called Officer Next Door programs. I mean, where we are getting into law enforcement over the years have provided officers with incentives to live in the communities in which they police in. So, I mean, all of these things together, and like Chief said, I think it's more about now everybody understanding the processes and the procedures and communicating with what the police department actually role is and function is, but not to rely specifically and directly on the police department to solve all things, but to know together we can make things happen and we can make change in a
Wow.
positive way.
Wow, I like that, Andrew. So, Chief Harris, we've got some questions coming in, and we got quite a few coming in. And the first one is says, how do we encourage or incorporate cultural diversity training within the police department?
Here's the thing. That's a very important question. The way that we incorporate diversity first is one of the things is I grew up in Prince George's County. So when I decided to be a police officer, I applied for Prince George's County. When I bought my first home, I bought a home in Prince George's County. Our officers have to reflect the community they serve. We cannot continue to, and I've seen this throughout my entire career. The community I serve now is very diverse. So with a diverse community, my officers have to be diverse. My officers have to reflect this community. And it's the same thing whether you are in Prince George's County, Washington, D.C. We want our officers to look like us. We want our officers to understand the culture. How can I'm a young man that grew up in Capitol Heights, a pretty rough area in Prince George's County. But how can somebody who never grew up in a rough area in Capitol Heights, never grew up in Prince George's County, come and police that area? We have to focus our recruitment on the people who we serve. And so in these larger departments, I've said this since day one when I became a patrol officer, when I worked for the Prince George's County. When we recruit, we have to find people who represent us. When we do that, that is where policing was founded. Sir Robert Peel started policing, the modern day policing, the model of policing. And when it came over to the United States, the whole premise is that it was the community's big part of it. You took somebody out of the community, made them that level of enforcement of an officer. And then when you get in trouble or something, there's a problem, I don't have to lock you up. An arrest should be the last resort. Now I can call your mama because I know your mother gonna take care of you. Now I can call your daddy because I know your daddy gonna deal with you.
Yeah,
And
that's
that
good.
is where we need to get back. That is exactly where we need to get back. That is how diversity is built upon. And it's the same thing. I didn't grow up in St. Mary's County. So why would I go be the police in St. Mary's County? I don't know the culture down there. I don't know how it is to be down there. But we do these mass recruitments, and we look all over the country for these officers, and it just doesn't make sense because they're not embedded in the community. I could have saved a bunch of money if I bought a house in another county. But I knew the importance of what it means to me to be in the community I serve. I'm not just the police chief. I'm a Black man in the county. So I have a son. I have a 2-year-old, and I'm raising him to be a man. So in that process, I have to understand the importance of our impact on our community and what that means. And so so it's a much larger picture that we have to look at here. Much larger. It's not just the issue with police officers. It's a culture thing. And when we really understand the culture of African Americans and things that we have been to, then we can fully understand why we act the way we do, or why things have gone the way they do, and how we make it better. But it's a global thing that we all have to be involved in it to make it better. And I think if we do that, if we come together and reason together, then we can start to make change now.
That's good. We got another question in the village, and it said, "Whatever happened to officer-friendly program in schools? What is the community policing plan, and how does it work today?" I remember officer friendly when I was in school, and I remember the police officers come and they were so friendly, and it made you want to grow up and be a cop. But I'm not sure what that looks like now because I don't even know if they still have that, Chief Ayers. Angie, I don't know if you've seen it. I have not seen it personally, but it may still be out there. Can either one of you elaborate on that?
Uh, Chief, you want to go first since you're still active? I know that I can speak on when I was working, but I'll let Chief speak on that because he's still active.
So the thing about it is, I think we've over the last couple of weeks, we've heard recent conversation on this resource officer, or what is it, the officers in the school, the officer that's on that beat that patrols and stuff like that. And I know that particularly MPD, where Officer Lewis came from, they have a ton of great programs, particularly there. But what I've noticed where I currently am is that the problem is that we need to redefine the roles of these resource officers. Are they there as a reaction to active shooters, or do they have an active part in the schools when it comes to teaching these kids, or bridging that gap with our young people? So I don't want when we see the conversation about officers leaving the schools, I don't think that necessarily we want our officers to leave the schools, but I do think that we need to redefine their role. Is it a reactive approach to something, or is it proactive in order to really make them a part of the community? So I don't want officers there just responding because we want them to respond to calls. We don't want that. We want our officers to be engaged in what's going on in the school system. And I got into policing because I had a relationship with an officer in my school. And then he kind of mentored me. And then I was like, you know what? I respect that. And I want to be in law enforcement. So I want that same relationship. But if you're there just to be reactive to something and then be disciplined, then to discipline kids, then that's a problem. And we don't want, and particularly as a resident, I don't want that.
Wow, this
Okay,
is a really good. Go ahead, Angie.
and from the same perspective that the chief said, the last 10 years that I was in the police department as a lieutenant, I was in charge of the school resource officer program. And so what happens with school resource officers is on a daily basis, they're in the classrooms. That's that whole community policing that just goes from being more narrow, being in the school, so that the officers and the kids in the school have established a rapport. They know the officer, they can go to the officer to report. So it's not reactionary like your regular radio run. The officer friendly program is a program that the Metropolitan Police Department had in youth division. But again, it's about money and resources. So when you start talking about defunding the police department, that is one of the resources that you will be taking away from the police department, is the fact that there was a Great and Dare program for officers, where officer friendly program. These are called specialized positions, as a matter of fact. These are not the initial focus of an officer even becoming a police officer. The initial focus for the police officer becoming a police officer is street patrol. So any other position within the police department after street patrol, in life and protection of the citizens for which state they are policing in, is a specialized position. And so, but because of there was so much violence occurring in the school where people were preying on the youth, we needed and we found it a need to protect our schools, protect our kids. And so that's a great program to continue to have, so that the officers right there, a lot of crimes were solved. You reduce bullying in schools because the officers have lesson plans that they go through with the schools. And you have officers that go to the elementary schools that read books to the kids, and those are the positive things that kids will be able to see, other than the fact that seeing officers lock their mother or lock their father up or lock somebody up in the community, or what they see bad on TV. Every year the police department does a whole big program on Christmas, where we go in and we provide gifts for the entire family. And, it's a lot of positive stuff that happens with the police department. But when you have one negative situation, it impacts. Yes.
And and I love the discussion that we're having, because it reminds me, my daughter's 15 now, and she was a baby then, probably like 3 years old, and she was in the back. And I'm gonna be the first to admit I was going a little bit over the speed limit, and I got pulled over. But he was the nicest officer, because Madison was in the back, and she says, "Officer, are you gonna lock my daddy up?" And he said, "No, I'm not gonna lock your daddy up." I just had to tell that story because there are great police out there, and I just wanted to put that in there. But we have a really good question for you, and I'm glad Officer Rivers is back. It said, "What's the plan? What is the plan to train white police officers that black boys and black men are not intimidating?" I don't know if Chief Rivers, anybody want to take that one?
I can just say this: we don't train based on color. That would be a hypocrisy.
Okay.
We train based on what our role is in terms of being in law enforcement. So the police officers in the Metropolitan Police Department go through 8 months of training. In 8 months of training, they have everywhere from report writing to incidents to threats to civil disturbance to making traffic stops, the whole gamut. So it's not about a particular color. If we start getting into color, then we're talking about racism and discrimination. So we cannot train based on color. Chief, I turn it over to you.
That's a fantastic question, but that goes back to my theory of, if there is a training component to this thing, that we need to do a better job of investing into training. The state of Maryland requires a certain amount of hours a year, and I've committed my department this year to exceed those hours. I want every officer to continue to go through bias-based training. But the reality of it is that if we look at the situations all across the country, there are departments there where the training was there. There will not be a training or a solution through technology that will completely solve this issue. If these officers are out there, it's a psychological thing. If these officers are out there, and let's say and they're scared to engage, scared to engage, or scared to interact with our community, they should not be police officers. We have to make sure, but it goes back to my first thing. We have to make sure that the officers who serve these communities reflect what that community looks like, and then reflect what that community looks like. That is how you prevent that. But there needs to be a level of a sort of bias-based training. There needs to be a continued effort psychologically to invest into these officers and say, say, what are you seeing? What are you understanding from these processes? And making sure that we are, as executives in the field, that we are double checking these things. As a chief, it's not common for people to see a chief out on the road and involved in different things. But guess what? The community over here in Evanston, they expect to see me. So it's different in Evanston. So I'm out there on the road when they have even a minor car accident. If I hear it, I go out there because it's important for that level. It's important for that level of engagement to my community. But what we have to do is we have to make sure that we are investing. So when we say, like with Officer Lewis talking, we talk about defunding police departments. I'm not quick to really talk on that because I don't know what that looks like.
Right.
Because we're saying that we need more training, but we're saying defund. We can't have both. So we need to really look at that as a community, though. It's not up to me as a chief just to determine what that looks like. It's not up to just the county executives or the mayor to determine what it looks like. We need the citizens to be involved and say, this is what we want. This is what we want our police departments to look like. This is what we want from our police officers. And then that is how it changes for the better.
Wow. Officer Rivers, I'm going to bring you in on this question. How do we rebuild the community and family? And how do we begin to build relationships again with all that's going on? All this audio is working this time. Officer Rivers, can you hear us? Can you hear us? We still can't hear him. We still can't hear him. All right, so Angie, why don't you take that one? How do we build these communities and families, and how do we begin to build that relationship and that trust again with everything that's going on?
Well, like I said before, we just have to continue to pray and trust. But after, God says after faith, you have to have works, So faith by itself is not, alone the answer, but you have to do something. And so, solving this problem is not based on law enforcement alone. Solving this problem is based on, social equality. We have to have equality in our neighborhoods. We have to have equal equality in our employment. We have to have, stability with, the disproportionate number of Black people that are in poverty. All of these things basically adds to our stress level, but basically adds to our living, and when you have disparity in communities or disparity in culture, that brings upon, people feeling like they're better than somebody else. And again, like I said, we have to institute, love in the system and reconciliation. But I think just in time, Larry, we just have to come up with plans for, the system. It's a system that we have to change. And in changing that system, like Chief Harris said, we have to vote. We have to go to our mayors. We have to go to our city councils, and we have to say, this is the way we want our police department to look like. We want to make sure that the officers that you are hiring live in the culture, live in the communities that they live in, and fit what we want our community to look like. And if they don't, I saw a question about, what does justice look like? Then we have to hold the police department and every, officer and supervisor accountable for training or the lack of training. And so it's just a coming together, and it's going to take some time, but just the whole process needs to be changed. So we have to vote what we want into the change. And we have to stay there until we get it to look like what we want. Because oftentimes when we have a heated situation like this, it tends to fade away before we get the reforms that we want. And I'm just so glad that this time that I feel that our change is going to come, because I feel like a whole lot of more people really hear us now.
I totally agree. We've got some really great questions coming in. I'm going to try to get to all of them, but Chief Harris, I'm going to come to you only because you're still working in law enforcement right now, and this is a really good one. It said, when does change start within law enforcement? Who would put the spark to the fire to get change put in place? Is it the community responsibility? Is it the community leaders? Or is it the politicians?
The reality of it is that it is everyone's responsibility. But the biggest stakeholder in that entire equation is the resident, is the resident in the community. The only way these issues get solved is through engagement. Recently, we just had a primary election in the state of Maryland, and we saw record numbers of people coming out to vote that we probably haven't seen in years. It comes with a level of engagement. It comes with not just voting for the people who incorporate our core values, but it comes. We want people to represent us that believe in what we believe. So it's a level of engagement on all counts. We can, but at the same time, let me tell you something. We cannot say we want change in these departments and don't understand that there is a systematic system that was inherently given to us. Nobody in this entire world right now started this problem. We
Yeah.
all inherited it. It was all handed down to us. So we have to first understand where we come from and where we are now in order to better engage the situation to know where we need to be. But if we cannot have people just get upset and we see Facebook posts and we see the protests and riots, and then a couple of months from now it dies down. Like Officer Lewis was saying, we have to speak truth to power. I don't want you to just be out there protesting. I am all for peaceful protests. I want you out there. I want you in the council meetings. I want you in the
Oh,
legislature.
that's good. That's good, Chief
Going
Harris.
into January, when we go into Annapolis to fight for the fight for legislation, we want our community stakeholders there. We don't want just the chiefs there. We don't want just the mayors there. We want our people there saying this is what the agenda will be and this is what we want. And then that is how you speak truth to power. If you have the attention of the people, you are the most powerful person in the room. It has nothing to do with your title. And so
Wow.
I don't want people just saying, "Hey, I want my police department to do this." I want you to be involved. If you want a change in your police department, let's start finding officers that represent the police department you want. Let's find officers in our community now and start getting them ready to go in these police departments and do our recruitment efforts. There is a holistic approach to the entire system, but it only starts with our community and our residents coming here and getting involved.
Wow, that's powerful. That's powerful. Well, let's take a couple more. So we've had one here. It says, I've had several run-ins with the police officers in Prince George's County and had bad experiences. How do I report my bad experiences?
So I can speak to that working in the field. So we all have a process in place when it comes to filing proper complaints. If you go online, you can Google that district station. You can Google Internal Affairs or the Office of Policy and Compliance. And if you have a concern, I encourage you to go and file. And I hate to say complaint, but go and file your concern so that it can be properly investigated. But legally, they can't investigate anything if you don't say anything, if you don't go file it. So there's a process to it. If you are, depending on what district that you are in, you can certainly go file and ask those questions. Prince George's County has 27 municipalities. So if there's a municipal government where there was an issue, you can certainly, I encourage people, they can call my office directly if need be. And we can, and if there's something going on, I can even outsource the investigation if we have to. But it's important that you speak up and then you go to that district station. There's a major there that you can talk to. There's a supervisor that you can talk to, and they should be able to guide you to the steps that you on the steps you need to do. But there is an investigative process that is required by law. They have to follow, and all that stuff, information is right online.
Officer Harris, this is before I go to the last question. This could be a myth, but I'm gonna ask it. Is it true that police officers have to meet a monthly quote, and that's how they get their tickets?
Well, I think that that is a myth. That is just
Okay,
foolish.
I thought so.
I used to think that. I used to think that too. But remember, if they write you a ticket or anything like that, remember it doesn't go to that police department. It doesn't go to it goes to the general fund in
The whole
Annapolis.
big picture.
It pays for education. It pays for road pavements and stuff like that. So it's no quota, and if there ever was a quota, it's corruption, and we need to
Corruption.
get rid of the people that's doing it.
Okay, so Chief Harris, last question I have for you before we switch over to our other panel. This is really good though. How do we combat racism that is happening right now in the police department if we don't address the fact that Black men and Black boys are a target?
I think that's the most important question right now of the day. At being a young man I'm actually one of the youngest chiefs in the country right now. 30,
Wow.
31 years old, and I'm a chief of police.
Wow.
And
Wow.
One of the things about it, I grew up in a rough neighborhood, and what I'm seeing statistically is that African American communities are over policed. We are over policed. So that is part of the problem when it comes to systematic racism. How do we have a system that tells us that we have police officers here to service, but when we go to jail, that it's supposed to rehabilitate our system, and you get out and you got to pay to be on probation. There's an entire system here that we have to understand. When we invest into our police officers, we have to invest into officers who represent our core values. We have to make sure that not only are they passing background qualifications, but they're passing psychological qualifications. We have to make sure that the probationary period is extended so that when officers are making the cut, they cannot be a part of these departments. We have to make sure that we are engaged in who these officers are. In my community, where my home is, I know who the officer is who patrols our community. I know who the community officer is who patrols our community. Not because I'm a chief, because I want to know who is out here, who's responding to these calls. We have to engage. We have to make sure that the hiring practices that we see, just because this is the way they hire people in California and Louisiana doesn't mean that's the way we need to hire people in the DMV. So we need to hire officers who meet our core expectations. We need to start looking at the next generation of policing and looking at our young men and our young women to serve. This is a male dominant field. We need women to step up and be a part of our community. But we don't want you to be officers in our community and then go live somewhere else or go be somewhere else and don't engage in our community. If I have a stake here, I'm going to act right, because I live here. But if I don't have a stake here and I go home to another county or another state every day, then I don't care. I don't care what happens when I come into areas like Baltimore City where violent crime is extremely high and I beat up on a couple of Negroes and I go back home. That is what but it only starts if we start telling the truth to one another. If we start saying this is what I've experienced. This is what I've seen. A lot of people don't know this. A lot of people do not know this, that I didn't just get into policing. I actually had a horrible experience with police officers, a horrible experience with police officers. And what happened was is that mentor I told you guys about is the reason why I started looking at him and I said, you know what, I want to be like him. I don't want to be like that experience that I had. And so we have to do a better job of engaging. But the racism department, we cannot just have Black African American officers patrolling our streets. They need to be running these departments. There's a lot of departments right now, all across the country where they look like they're diverse, but they're not the African Americans that they aren't making the decisions. So we need to be at the table making the decisions for these departments. So because we have a better stake at it, we need to make sure that we are taking the test. And we don't want to be patrol officers for 20 and 30 years. We need to be in leadership roles, making sure that we can impart our knowledge on the next generation of police officers. So it's a holistic approach, but it starts with that level of engagement. Everything that you hear me say is going to talk about engagement because we cannot be any better if our community does not engage.
It's so many great questions coming here. I'm gonna do these last two real quick. How do I find out who's patrolling my community? That was one of the questions, Chief. How do we find out who's patrolling my community? How do we find that out?
So if you are a resident in Prince George's County, wherever you are, you can call that district station. You can find out who your community oriented your police officer, your cops officer is. You can find out. I would encourage you to find out who the major of their district is, who is the captains of their district, and you call. If you are not involved in your local civic association or your HOA or something like that, I encourage you to get involved in that because a lot of times they have that information and it's not trickling down. But you can Google this information a lot of times if you're in our area, and you find out who's in charge. But be engaged in what is going on in your community, and then that is how you know, because you may have somebody in your community that you don't like, that does not reflect the values that you were talking about, and then that way you can call the major and say and talk about your instance. But it's a continuous line of communication that's going. So I encourage you to call your local legislators, find out. They have to respond to you. You're paying taxes.
That's
You
right.
paying them, so they got
That's
to
right.
respond. there's people in my community now that call me all the time and let me tell you something. If I could, I would ignore them, but I don't have that option. So I have to be responsible. Because guess what? They paying me, and I got to keep my good government job because I can't go home tomorrow.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, Chief Harris, I know you're going to hang around for a second. Angie, thank you so much for joining us. But I want to thank the Officer Rivers. But Angie, your family. But I really want to just say to you, Chief Harris, I called you up. I talked to the mayor. She put you on the line, and immediately you said yes, you would join. And man, we're gonna have to do a part two. I already know because we still got so many questions coming in. And I thank you, Chief Harris, for hanging around for a little bit. Angie, thank you so much for joining. Right? And we're gonna have to do a part two. So you're coming back.
Yeah, but thank
You're
you
coming back. You're
for
coming back.
the
So
opportunity.
what we're going to do now, we're going to say thank you to Chief Harris, but he's going to hang around in case you guys have some more questions later on. But I want to bring in three young men. One is in the Navy. One is getting his master's at Howard University, and the other is getting ready to join Allstate in their leadership program. So I wanted to bring them on and then wanted them to share their experience and how did they feel when they got pulled over and things of that nature. So we have Shante Cole coming up. He's in the Navy. We have Jacob Jordan. Jacob is just joining Allstate and he's going into their leadership program. And then we have Tony. Tony is getting his master's at Howard University. All right, they're all there. Great. So I told Jacob, I was talking to Jacob last week, and I said, Jacob, I really want you to share your story because Jacob comes from a biracial family where his mom is Caucasian and his dad is African American. So I said, so Jacob, everything that's going on and all the unrest, how do you feel? So I asked Jacob to come on and kind of share his story, and then I'll come to Tony and to Shante.
Okay. Yeah, so my name is Jacob Jordan, and I do have a little different experience being that I am biracial. Like you said, my mom's white, so I have a white family, and I have a black family. My dad is black, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm discriminated against. I have to worry about if my dad's going to be able to come home at the end of the night. He's not getting stopped by the police. I have to worry about my uncles, my cousins, and I feel like being biracial, it gives me more of a responsibility to kind of share my side of things to my white side of family, to educate them, to make sure they're not making racist statements or discriminating people or scared of black people because they see me doing good. So that's basically how I feel about that.
And I know, Jacob, it can be very different because I know you told me your family in West Virginia is different
Yeah.
from the other side of the family.
Yeah, and it's different. And I faced discrimination before I was even born. Like because my mom had a baby with a black man, they basically cut her off before I was even born. So I've faced discrimination from day one.
Tony, I'm gonna come to you. So you're Howard University getting your master's. What has been your encounter with the police officer? Because we'll be able to bring, if you guys have any questions, we're gonna still have Chief Harris. He's hanging around in case you guys. He hung around just for you guys because he wanted to make sure that he can interact with you all to see how you guys are feeling and what questions he can answer for you as well. But Tony, what has been your experience for Howard and all over since you travel?
So I've had an interesting dynamic with the police. So I've had some negative encounters, none that have been as drastic as yours, Mr. Parrish. But I've had some encounters where police will maybe talk rough, and perhaps would get targeted. And I used to have very long locks. I had locks for almost 7 years, and I would constantly find myself just being a target and being discriminated against in that sense. However, I deal with young adolescent men in urban communities. I worked with what they term as at-risk youth on the west side of Charlotte, which if you familiar with Charlotte, you know that is the side of town that most people wouldn't venture to if they're not from there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've dealt with, I worked with the Charlotte's sheriff's office, and every week they came in and built relationships with my young males who honestly had very negative experiences with the police. A lot of them, they experienced their fathers being arrested. A lot of them experience police abusing their power. A lot of them have felt helpless in the arms of the police. So I'm aware that there's a lot of tension that's going on, and there are a lot of officers that abuse their power. Um, However, I've also been on the other side where I've been able to kind of help bridge the gap and kind of mend the relationship. Although I don't feel like mending the relationship is what's ultimately going to get what we need, and that is fair treatment for black males. It's not a situation where it's all about good officers versus bad officers. If you have cancer, you have to get the cancer out, and there are
Mm,
systems in place
good, Tony.
that um, prevents officers that shouldn't be patrolling the streets from being off the force. So I think largely it's a system more so than just having um, good officers and friendly officers, officer friendly and all that, and more than taking pictures and doing the Cupid shuffle and playing basketball with cops. I feel like that's not important. And I don't take pictures with. We did the program all year long with the sheriff's office. I didn't take one picture
Mm,
because I don't want to send the message that all we need is friendlier cops. I want to send the message that we need to change the system.
mm. Tony, that's good. That's really good. So, Shante, we want to come to you, and I know you're in the Navy. So, what has been your experience with the law?
Well, personally, from the Navy side of things, I know that, from the military standpoint, we are all coming together. Like, we kind of disregard the whole concept of race. We're coming together and we're protecting the United States. We're protecting rights, right? But when we come home and we see that these rights are being violated, that's something that's not okay for anybody. My personal experience as a civilian, though, I have been pulled over, and thankfully enough, I mean, when I first got pulled over, I'm not gonna lie to you, I was scared. I mean, I've heard the news, I've seen things on television, and there's always that thought in the back of your mind, like, if I move too fast, if I go to put my car in park, if I were to accidentally, I don't know, sneeze, any little subtle movement that they'll pick up on, you're worrying, like, if I move too fast, is he gonna pull his gun, and is that gonna be the end of it for me? And that it's a sad thing to say, but it's a fact. It's a fact. And for me, I was scared. The cop came and talked to me. He's like, "Hey, relax. You were going over the speed limit. Okay, so that's what I'm pulling you over for. I'm gonna give you a citation. I need you to slow down." And in my case, this was a white cop, and so that comes to my next point, where not all cops are bad. And just like how Tony was saying, we need to cut the cancer out, because that cancer, all it's going to do, it's going to spread. And then next thing you know, on the news and the media that we have now, those cops are being glorified and they're being shown all over the television. So guess what? Now these kids are going to grow up thinking all cops are bad when they're not. It's that group that is spoiling the name of cops, and it's bringing the value of what they do down. So once we get that cancer out, then that's when the trust will start to be building up. It's nice for the cops to go out into the community and build that rapport, yes, but there are more important things to be done.
Very good, Tony. I'm going to come to you right now, and we saw what happened with Floyd, and then we saw it happen again in almost Atlanta. A week later, not even a week later. How did that make you feel?
I think largely as a black male, I've never felt safe in the arms of police. Period. So I wish that I could say that I was shocked, but I'm not. Um, I believe it was Will Smith that said
Mm,
racism is not getting worse; it's getting recorded. So now these things are very visible because we have smartphones at our disposal, and now we can see those things. But these are things that I've witnessed my whole life, and in my community, these are things that we've all heard stories about, and it's nothing that's shocking. I think now is just time for cops to be held accountable. The issue is that even though we're protesting now, even though we have the videos that and even we have some charges, there are still systems in place to preserve those officers. And so largely we have to do things to completely dismantle those systems that are meant to protect police officers. And it's not just white officers, because just at A&T, there was a black officer that violated a black student, and we signed a petition and got those officers off of the force. But that's A&T. You mess with A&T, we're different. We cut different. You know, it's a little bit different. We're a tight knit community, and we know how to make some things happen. However, I keep going back to this, is a system that is meant to protect cops and has been that way forever. Even back, when we go back to the 13th Amendment, and then black people getting locked up and convict leasing. There's a lot of different dynamics, but those rules and things were in place for so long, and they were meant. Just to be completely blunt and honest, they were meant to protect white people, white officers. Before there were black people that were on these forces that were patrolling the streets. These systems uphold a status of whiteness and a status of being untouchable, so that they can be elusive and continue to do whatever it is that they feel like doing. But overall, when I saw those videos and I keep seeing these stories, I'm not shocked, almost to the point that I'm numb to it, because I'm so used to seeing it. And we've seen Trayvon Martin, and we've seen Freddie Gray, and we've seen all these things happen repeatedly, and it is no longer a shock to me. However, it encourages me to continue to fight.
Jacob, how did it make you feel? Thanks, Tony.
Like Tony said, racism has always been around, but now it's being recorded. So, and it kind of does make you feel numb, because you constantly see in the news, it's constantly another name on the list of a black man getting murdered, or a black woman getting murdered, and it's time for change now. And even with Breonna Taylor, like the police officers, there's nothing that's happened with that. So there's time has changed, and I feel like it's happened before, but now we are coming together to stay firm about what's going on, to basically initiate change. So we really need to vote. And I saw a question in here, and I am registered to vote, and I feel like I'm advocating for that, to really get people registered to vote, get people really motivated that, and learn about who's running. Because a lot of my friends, they don't really pay attention to politics, but that's where a lot of these changes that we need to make start at.
Shante, how did it make you feel?
Definitely, I both with both of the other gentlemen online, Jordan and Tony, I'm with them on 100%. Just like what Jordan was saying, the voting is so important. Having the younger generation, having everybody that feels like we need change, go out to the communities, make the change. It doesn't matter if it's just for just the police force. It doesn't matter if it's just the judicial system. Make the change that you want. We keep saying it, but what are we doing to make that change actually start? What steps are we going to be taking? Now, that step comes from voting. It comes from being active in community. It comes from all these things. And it's so beautiful to see the protesters, see Black, white, Hispanic, all these people come together around the world, and they're all raising their fists. Black Lives Matter. And so for all this change to be happening, for these steps to go, I'm sorry, let me repeat myself. For the steps that we were taking to protest, to drive us through the goal that we want, that's the difference from the before. There was a lot of talk, but now we're actually seeing action, and these are the steps that are needed, so that way we can see this change that we want in the end, our end goal, our end dream.
Perfect. So now we're going to rebroadcast this on YouTube. So I want each one of you to give me one point that you would give to one of your peers who will watch this, that's going to make a difference to help us bridge this gap between law enforcement and the community. Jacob, I'm going to start with you.
I would say don't be silent about the situation. Just don't be silent, because use your voice, because I like the quote, stand for something or you'll fall for anything. So definitely stand for what's right.
Okay. Shante, what's the one thing that you would leave to your peers who will be watching this? And who knows, it may go viral and everybody's watching this. So what's the one thing you would leave them to say, here's an opportunity for us to bridge the gap between our community in law enforcement?
I want to education, the biggest thing. I want to teach them and show them what they can do to make the change. I can tell them and I can be like, hey, here's this information. But what are they going to do with that if they don't know how to actually start that change? You know, I want to educate them. I want you to vote. I want to show you how to vote. I want to show you how to get registered. Those type of things.
Okay. Tony, what's the one thing for you?
I think the one thing for me is um, encouraging, especially black males, to get in the school system, whether that's through mentorship, whether that is um, in any form, as a teacher, as a counselor, whatever way you can get in the school system, spend time in the school system. And the reason why I say that is because exactly what we see here in the in criminal justice system, we see that same pattern in education, and essentially what's happening is it's transferring from education to the criminal justice system. Which what's the demographic of students that get the most out of school suspension? Black males. And so it's important that we start by addressing the system in the education system, I believe, because that's something that we can do immediately. That is something we can do today. Yes, we do need a protest. Yes, we do need to advocate, um, and we need to push that forward. But what can you do today? Today, you can help by mentoring these young males. Today, you can help by helping them out academically. You can advocate for them um, when they're up for suspension and expulsion. Because I was actually up for expulsion my junior year of high school,
Mm.
and someone advocated for me, and I was able to stay in school. I stayed in school, got a scholarship, played ball for a little bit, went to A&T, got my bachelor's degree, and now I'm getting my master's from Howard. And that was made possible because somebody advocated for me. And even
Wow.
in the school that I was in Charlotte, if you're familiar with this community, I was at Tuckasegee Elementary School in the heart of the West Side, and at the school that I was at, I was able to help them decrease suspensions in school suspensions completely, decrease out of school suspensions, and cut them in half. And now they're on the path to being what we call a fully restorative school, which means that they no longer suspend kids, but now they teach them relationship skills, so they know how to
Wow.
build relationships,
Wow.
manage relationships, and come back in to an environment and be a productive citizen. So I think those are the things that are very important for us now, because if we can limit our engagement with the police, if you put yourself in a position to get approached by the police, then you will be approached by the police. So if we can get in the education system now and help train these young men, and not just young men, women as well, um, then we can move forward. So that's something we can do today.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I know we had Chief Harris hang around for a second. So, Jacob, I'm going to take you out just for a second so I can bring Chief Harris in, then I'll bring you back because I wanted to see if you guys had a question for him. And I wanted to bring him back in because he hung around, so I don't want him to keep hanging around, but he's still hanging around in case, Shantae, you have a question for him. So we've got Chief Harris still here, and you've heard these young men just have great dialogue, Chief Harris. So, Shantae or Tony, anything that you guys would want to ask the Chief?
I know I had actually wrote a few questions down that I had, and now I've actually asked from others to see, you know, what your response would be, Chief. And so, respectfully, I just want to ask, what are some things that you've witnessed, you know, going from a patrol to chief, you know, rising through the ranks? What have you witnessed that was racist? What have you saw in your community that may be in your community or other communities as you've gone through the ranks?
So, like I said, I'm actually one of the youngest chiefs in the country, and
Wow.
my best friend who was a year younger than me, he's only 31. And rising through the ranks, what I've seen is it's really not I've seen the level of oppression when it comes to how hard it is for us as African Americans to really make it and work a little harder to get to where we want. But I have seen our own people put us down in a lot of situations. I am a chief of police, and I know people look at the uniform, but I'm not on. But first, I'm a black man, and I'm a godly man first. And years ago, God gave me a vision, and I get emotional about that because I
Mm.
hold on to what God originally told me. So
Wow.
it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It doesn't matter what they see. As
Mm.
long as I'm doing the right thing, I stand by that. And so when I came up, I do see things. Well, I don't really see that but I do hear things. I hear that people don't want young black people in these positions. I hear that they don't appreciate, or
My God.
they think that when they
Mm.
see this uniform that I just arrived, that I didn't work hard to get here. But I tell you that you all are the most dangerous people in the world to that oppressor. Why? Because you are black men with vision.
Mm.
And I am a living witness that if you hold on to what God told you, we can do it, and we can do it together. I didn't decide to become a chief because I wanted to have authority over people. I decided to become a chief because I wanted to
Wow.
help people like in Capitol Heights where I grew up.
Wow.
So I stand on that. And so I hear things that people don't want. People don't want young blacks in these positions. People don't want us to do certain things, or they don't like that I may be here. But I don't pay any attention, and I really do ignore it, because if I focused on that, I wouldn't have time to do anything else. And so when people hate, I honestly, I get to a point. I talk to my mayor about it. She's a huge, great mentor to me. But when people hate, and I hear things about they don't like that I'm doing this, they don't like, somebody had an issue with the stars that I wore. They thought I should wear the stars or something like that. And you know what? And I learned to ignore it. I learned to say, you know what? At the end of the day, if I didn't have haters,
Mm.
then I would be concerned. When I don't have people hating on me, then I'll be concerned. But for the most part, I believe that my obligation first is to my family. I believe that I pray every day for this community, and I just can't worry about it. I got to keep on doing what God told me to do. And every great person that God has ever used in every scripture that you look at was the one person that you would least suspect to lead.
My
Least
God.
suspect to lead.
My God.
He grabs a man out of Egypt that stutters and tells him to go to Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go." People talk about the story of Noah, but they don't know that Noah was a drunk running around the town, and he uses him to save a bunch of folks. So I take that for example. They took a boy from Capitol Heights who was once locked up. A lot of people don't know my story. That once was locked up in Prince George's County, and now I'm sitting at a table with the same oppressors who said I couldn't be what I am today. It is not because what they said; it's because I held on to what God originally told me, and I encourage anybody to do that.
Wow. Wow, Chief.
If
Wow.
if I could just chime in, and just offer a word of encouragement. We know the Bible says many are the afflictions of the righteous, which means that just because you're living right doesn't mean you won't be afflicted. Just because you're doing the right thing doesn't mean that you won't be afflicted. Just because you work hard to get where you are doesn't mean you won't be afflicted. And so I just want to send some encouragement and love your way, and say that as a black community, we do honor you. And it's important now that we destroy the mentality that all officers are bad, or that officers that are higher in rank are token Negroes. But I think to I think I was once ignorant, to the fact that even as a chief, there are a lot of things that you just do not have control over. I used to think, okay, he's a chief. That means that he has autonomy. That means that he has the opportunity to create change exactly how he feels it in his heart and in his spirit. But
Mm.
that is not what's happening, because there's actually systems that even oppress you. There are actually systems that even prevent you from changing what you want to change. And so that's why it's so important that we work together. And that's why I did the program with the young males, because I want them to understand, like, that is not just an officer. That is a human first. That is a father. That is somebody's son. And that it's important that we know these things, and it's important that as Black people we educate ourselves about those things that may be keeping some of our officials handcuffed from even preventing the change that's in their heart and in their spirit. So I just wanted to add that little tidbit in there.
Wow. Well, before we let Chief go, and we're going to wrap this up, Shanti, I'm going to have you go off for a second because I want to bring Jacob in just so he gets a chance to say something as well. And then I'll bring the three of you back in to close. I know we're bringing Jacob back in. Chief Harris, my hats off to you, man. I'm proud of you. Like I said, I only had a conversation with you for about 5-7 minutes, and I could already I was like, man, this thing is going to be so powerful on Saturday. And I'm telling you, God showed up and showed out. So I just want to just say thank you. Jacob, I want to give you an opportunity before we close out if you had a question or anything for Chief Harris before we let him go.
Okay. Yeah. I can ask the chief a question. So, what are some specific areas of improvement do you think that your department can make to better the relationship between the community and the police departments? Or if you have any other advice for other departments of what areas that they can improve, such as I know banning chokeholds was one of the topics of discussion, or hiring independent agencies to review complaints within the department.
That's a great question. I think here in the town of Edmiston, we are uniquely based. So what I would like to see is when it comes to reform in police department. So we have situations now. So you have, for example, one of the things that I'm big on is when we have issues of use of force. So right now, if you have an issue of use of force and we believe force is unreasonably applied, there's a level of discipline that goes within the police department. But for me, I believe that's an assault. If
Mm.
you do that, if you take that oath and you abuse that power, then that should be investigated by the DOJ or by the local prosecuting office if we find that the use of force was unjustified. We just implemented, I think it's crazy that we have to implement a policy that says that you don't choke people. That's just something that you should know that you shouldn't be allowed to do. I don't think that there's going to be one policy or one technology advancement that is going to solve all the answers. Because if we see that video in Minneapolis, and I made all my officers watch it, they had the body cameras, they had the policies in place, and they still killed that man.
Mm.
So we have to it's a systematic thing that we have to change the culture
Wow.
where we don't allow that to even happen in our communities. And officers have to think twice before they even do those things. But I think what has to happen is that there needs to be a higher penalty for officers who break this oath. If we get in trouble now, then we go through the same judiciary system, and the same guidelines apply to us. I think that if there is a real act of misconduct that happens, we took the oath. You as a citizen haven't had the training that we had. You didn't
Mm.
take the oath that we did. If we violate the oath, and that just doesn't go for the police department, that goes for our elected officials, that goes for our mayors, our councils, our representatives. If they violate what we entrusted them to do, then there should be tougher penalties on that. And then that should be hanging over their head. We cannot just give them these slaps on the wrist like I just saw in Baltimore recently with the mayor. When you violate that oath, when we have to take pride in what we do. This is not something. This is not something that is just given to us. We signed up for this, and you violate it. Then there's consequences to that level of violation. I think that's how it works. But I'm curious to know what our community wants too. I'm curious to see what our stakeholders, when we come to the table. We're starting a citizens advisory committee in Evanston, but I'm curious to know what they want when it comes to these levels of discipline. The biggest thing that we can do is be transparent. We're not telling our community what's going on in these departments. We're not, immediately it gets to. I feel this atmosphere where it feels like you got to protect. You got to protect. You got to protect the government, or you got to try to clean things up. No, you got to be transparent with people. Hey, this is where we are, but this is where we're going. That's true leadership. True leadership is when you are given something and you move it forward. Right now, we got a lot of managers just keeping the roof on the house. I want to be the type of leader that we really move things forward. So, it may be a shock to a lot of people. I'm for reform. You will see me, my name in Annapolis, come January in the legislature in Maryland, because I'm talking about reform, and it's not to be harsh on policing. But what it is to be a reality to our community and make sure that we hold ourselves accountable. We hold ourselves to the same stakes that we would anybody else. And I think that's how we do it. But you guys are, I tell you, you guys are awesome. If this cannot just stop with the start and stop with a conversation, it has to be us getting involved. And so, you guys look up my information. You call anytime. You need me out there. I was down on Black Lives Matter Plaza in DC just last week. If you all need me for something, you call and make sure that we reach out. So, because I honestly believe that we only do it if we do it together.
Well, Chief, I don't want to hold you any longer. I just want to say on behalf of the entire S.H.I.N.E CDC and our founder, Dr. Jazz, thank you so much. I can just tell and I can feel your passion and your spirit because you was with us for the entire time. You didn't leave. And I just want to say, man, we are praying for you and we got a hedge of protection. Know that the VGC family is praying for you and there's a wedge of protection around you. And you said 31, right? You're 30.
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm gonna tell you this: eyes haven't seen, ears haven't heard all that He's got for you, because this ain't the end. This ain't the end. I can see it. I mean, I could just feel your kindred spirit when we talked over the phone the other day. So I just want to say my hat's off to you. And I'm 52, and I'm looking up to you. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to bring in Shantae, and then we're going to close it out. Solomon, if our president and founder want to come in and say a few words, I can go off the camera. If not, I'm going to go ahead and close it out. We are definitely going to do a part 2. This was phenomenal, phenomenal. Jacob, thank you. Shantae, thank you. Tony, thank you. Angie, thank you. Chief Harris and Pastor for putting this together, because this wasn't my idea. This was her idea. She was like, Larry, I'm giving you the clear vision that you go execute. And I just want to say to you three, all the stuff that's coming in on the chat, because of you all, our future looks so much brighter. I have no doubt we're going to win. All of you are registered to vote, right? Because that's how we'll make change. But it's not just making the change at the presidential level, because everybody comes out then. But I believe it was Sylvia, when Pastor had her last V-Live, I think it was Sylvia said, not only voting when it's the presidential election, but we've got to vote when it's the city council, when it's the county executives, when it's our congressmen, when it's the governors. We got to vote in all the elections, so our voice will never be silent again. That's how we're truly going to affect change. So I just want to thank you guys so much. If I had $1 million, I'd send all of you a chat. But and Pastor's in there, and she's in the chat. She's saying thank you all as well. You guys showed up and showed out. And that's the whole purpose for the vision that God gave Pastor around this S.H.I.N.E CDC. And it's to share hope in a negative experience. There's so many negative things being said. There's so many things that we're seeing on television and all across the world. But I'm so glad that we have a pastor that sees and gets download information from God and saw us doing this, and God did the rest. So I just want to say thank you, VGC Village. Thank the panel, and you guys did a phenomenal job. Thank you guys for joining today. There will be a part 2, because this could have went on for hours, but I want to make sure we respect everybody's time, and I want to respect these young men's time as well. So thank you all, and I'll call each one of you individually. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish.
My pleasure. My pleasure.